Without further ado, let's get started with the program. Let's see, I'm going to pick out somebody in green to introduce the first speaker. Okay, Susan Glickman, who is the Florida Director of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, is here in her clean green outfit to introduce our first speaker. Susan.
Mayor Dyer, thank you so much. It's inspiring to see what great things that you and the City of Orlando are doing with the Greenworks Orlando and the Greenworks Community Action Plan. And when change is required, leadership is everything. Warren Bennis, who's an author and a scholar known for his work in the field of leadership, he actually passed away last month. But he says leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. And Mayor Dyer, you are a great leader. I and everyone in the room are watching you translate your vision into reality, and for that we thank you. I am now privileged to introduce Peter Lehner. Peter is the dynamic and visionary leader of the Natural Resources Defense Council, and I personally have had the privilege of working with NRDC over the last decade. They are one of the nation's leading environmental advocacy organizations with over 1.5 million members and activists and over 500 staff people, all working towards the same goal of protecting our health and our families, our communities, jobs, and wild spaces. Peter guides NRDC's policy positions, the advocacy program, communications plans, development, administration. Get tired thinking about all that, don't you, Peter? He manages NRDC's 7 offices, as well as leading the Action Fund's political activities. And they are working every day to accelerate clean and efficient energy, transportation, and protecting our oceans, our homes, and our health from pollution. Peter has a special passion, which he works to foster the fundamental right for all people to have a voice in decisions that affect their environment. He works every day to break down that pattern of disproportionate environmental burdens that are often borne by people who face social and economic inequities. Peter and NRDC strive to create a new way of life for humankind, where we can be sustained indefinitely and we're not spoiling or depleting the fragile resources that support all life on Earth. I am honored to introduce to you Peter Lehner.
Thank you, Susan. For those who don't know, Susan's known as Clean Energy Girl, and is from our point of view at NRDC, one person is as good as a big office because Susan is so good down here. Although I admit, given your introduction, I wasn't sure who you were talking about. It didn't sound like me. And thank you, Mayor Dyer, and really congratulations to you, to Commissioner Stewart, and your whole team of what you're doing down here. It's really important at the global scale that clean energy not be a New York, California type of issue. It is an issue for everybody, and you are really leading the way in the Southeast, and that is important not only in the U.S., but because what we do here is important around the world, it really does have global implications. So thank you very much for your leadership. The last time I was in Orlando, actually, I was giving a talk of green infrastructure to a bunch of floodplain managers, and I was trying to convince them that cities can do better to use natural systems like wetlands and natural buffer zones and streams to capture the rain and deal with runoff rather than just a lot of cement. It's cheaper, it's cleaner, it has a lot of ancillary benefits. It turns out, of course, that capturing that runoff is even more important now in light of the heavy rains and storms brought about by climate change. So it's sort of ironic, and perhaps there's a good omen here that I'm back here now talking about climate change and what we can do. I'm going to shut this, and I hope that doesn't, well, anyhow. So anyhow, I'm glad to be back here for this and have the opportunity to be with you. The groundwork that we lay, the cost-effective strategies, the innovative solutions, the smart business practices, all of which are bringing us to a cleaner, healthier, and more prosperous future. And I do mean it's important that this is a more prosperous future, because the kind of solutions that I'm talking about will save money for consumers, businesses, and can help spur the local economy. And if there's just one message that I want you to take home today, it's this. It's that clean energy and clean efficiency are good for the climate and they're good for our prosperity. Don't believe those who are trying to make it an either or and using scare tactics. So by now, many of you probably have actually personal stories about climate change. If you're from New York like me, a lot of it is often Hurricane Sandy. The flooded homes and the subways, the downed trees. We were without power in Manhattan for almost a week. I don't know if any of you saw the videos of the water flooding into the subways. I mean, it really was awesome and not in a good way. But of course, here in Florida, you've had more than your fair share of hurricanes in recent years. I think it was just a few months ago that Governor Scott declared a state of emergency in, 26 counties after some thunderstorms dumped 2 feet of snow, of rain. Sorry. We get the snow, you get the rain, but 2 feet of rain in the Panhandle in just 24 hours. And extreme weather events like this are the hallmark of a warming climate. They're deadly and they're costly. In 2012 alone, extreme weather events cost the country more than $140 billion. And U.S. taxpayers, you and me, had to pick up $100 billion of that tab. And the Southeast, of course, has more billion-dollar weather disasters over the past few years than the rest of the country combined. So the bottom line is climate change is a problem we can't afford to ignore. You probably remember that maybe about a month ago, former Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson compared the climate crisis to the 2008 financial bubble. And he said, we've all seen what happened and felt the cost of ignoring the financial bubble. This one's going to be bigger. Let's not ignore the climate bubble. Well, the good news is, of course, that we're not ignoring the climate bubble. At least some people aren't ignoring it. And just as many of us have our personal stories of the impacts of climate change, we now have often our personal stories of our solutions to climate change. It may be that you walk or bike to work more often. It may be that you've changed your diet or how much you fly. I put new insulation in my home, and every day I can see that it's saving me money and keeping the house more comfortable. But what makes these personal stories interesting is that they're not just happening in a vacuum. We now have smart policies taking place in cities like New York City, where I'm from, and Orlando here. We have it in states as disparate as Massachusetts, North Carolina, Oregon, and Illinois, and now at the federal government as well. And the solutions that are being put in place, whether it be GreenWorks Orlando, or NRDC City Energy Project, of which Orlando is a part, or national solutions like EPA's Clean Power Plan. All of these are going to save energy and money for cities, for businesses, and consumers. They're going to make our air cleaner, our climate safer, and our families healthier. So these are the groundworks for building our future. But of course, we're only going to do it if we all are working together. That is, us individually, as community groups, schools, business leaders, elected officials, agency officials, and everybody else. And it will take, as Susan said, leadership to get this done. Now, some people will say, of course, that fighting climate change is too expensive. And some people, not to get political, will say, well, they don't even know if it's real because they're not a scientist. To say the obvious, I'm not a doctor, but I listen to my doctor. When the plumber says something needs to happen, I listen to the plumber, and I listen to my lawyer, even though I'm a lawyer and I probably should know better. We listen to experts who know what they're talking about. Thousands of scientists all over the world who've been studying this issue for decades, and as well as the clear evidence before our very eyes, make clear that we better get cracking on solutions or we're going to be in a heap of trouble. There have been 3 major comprehensive studies in just the past few months, from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the National Climate Assessment. And here in Florida, your state has been declared a disaster area 19 times since 2000 due to damage from hurricanes, storm surges, heavy rains, and flooding. In 2011 alone, Florida experienced record-breaking heat in 20 counties and 34 broken heat records, record-breaking rain in 22 counties and 27 broken rainfall records, and extreme drought. The National Climate Assessment, which Mayor Dyer just mentioned, it estimates that more than $1 trillion worth of property could be inundated if sea levels rise just 2 feet. And half of that is right here in Florida. So in low-lying coastal areas like here, just a few inches of sea level rise will impair stormwater drainage systems, the things I was talking about when I was last in Orlando. And this means rainwater, even from a small shower, will flood streets and neighborhoods instead of flowing into the ocean. Rising seas also increase the risk of saltwater intruding into freshwater supplies. Something I was thinking about as taking my shower this morning. You don't have, in California, whenever you travel there, they have extreme drought, so extreme water-saving devices on their showers. I can promise you, take care of your freshwater supply. You'll enjoy it in the morning. But across the southeast, we're also looking at more days of 95-degree weather. It was probably close to that when I landed last night, which is a real health risk in itself, especially for the elderly. And hot days, in addition, bring a rise in air pollution, allergens, and of course energy demand, as everyone tries to crank up their air conditioner to stay cool. And if that energy is coming from dirty power, as it often is, we're pumping more heat-trapping gas in the atmosphere as we're trying to cool down, making the whole thing even worse. Separate from NRDC, I actually manage a coffee farm in Costa Rica, and climate change is having a huge impact there. The cool mountains where coffee grows are getting warmer. Pests that used to be controlled by the weather more are expanding. Rainfall patterns on which agriculture is dependent are changing dramatically. So it's not just as a New Yorker, not just as an NRDC advocate, but actually as a farmer and as a small businessman, I can tell you it's not easy to adapt to climate change, to the actual changes of the world around us. It actually is easier to work to reduce those emissions and reduce the amount of climate change. So that's what we have to get going. Just a few weeks ago, the White House Council of Economic Advisors announced that delaying action on climate change for just 1 decade, or 10 years, will likely increase the cost of doing so by about 40%. The longer we delay fixing our homes, we know the ultimate cost is just more. The same is here. The longer we delay, the more it will cost, and the more dislocating the solutions. So action now is imperative, and the good news is we're to begin seeing action on a lot of fronts. On the federal level, a few years ago, we had major steps taken to improve the efficiency of our cars and trucks, and already we're seeing money saved and far less pollution. And this year, on June 2nd, EPA announced its first ever proposal to cut pollution from existing power plants, which are the largest source of global warming pollution in the country. This is the single most important step this country will take to combat climate change. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of this plan because it's a story about innovation, and it actually is a wonderful opportunity. It starts with innovation, it sets up a framework of disbursement of innovation, and as we know from history, innovation is a good thing for both our energy, our economy, and our environment. Now, we've known for decades that power plants are the biggest source of carbon pollution in the country. They produce about 40% of our carbon emissions, and right now there are no national limits on how much carbon a power plant can pump into the atmosphere. None. We have limits on almost all other types of pollution, but not carbon pollution. They have a free pass to pollute. But for years, we were stymied on this issue. Congress was gridlocked, and the administration was focused on other priorities. But a number of us looked and realized there was a way forward. We knew that we didn't have to wait for Congress, that in fact the existing Clean Air Act, passed repeatedly and strengthened by Congress over the years, gave EPA ample authority. But there was a perception in Washington that the Clean Air Act was too expensive and wasn't going to be very effective. But the EPA approach proved this conventional wisdom wrong. It came up with an innovative strategy to cut power plant pollution. It was fair, it was flexible, and when they ran the numbers using the same analysts that utilities use, they found that it was going to be incredibly cost effective. Not only would the average consumer save on electric bills as a result of energy efficiency measures, but tens of billions of dollars of savings of health costs and weather disasters avoided would far outweigh the costs of implementation. What's more, implementing these standards would create more than 270,000 new efficiency-related jobs. In Florida alone, probably more than 10,000 jobs. And this includes jobs for electricians and roofers and carpenters and insulation workers, all these people on the ground right here because you can't outsource installing efficiency. Last summer, when President Obama announced this historic climate action plan, he directed EPA to cut carbon using this innovative approach. I was actually in the audience then, and I remember that the president's teleprompter actually broke down because it was too hot. So instead of looking at his teleprompter back and forth, he started being like the rest of us, looking at his speech on the podium. It was as if we couldn't wait to start dealing with climate change. So when EPA proposed its plan this June, the agency did as the president asked, suggesting this fair and flexible framework allowing each state to drive its own energy destiny while driving its whole carbon pollution down on a national scale. It's not a one-size-fits-all, it's allowing each state the flexibility it needs. The plan is built on the very simple recognition that America's energy sector works as a system. It's not just individual plants or one smokestack. It's many pieces working together. Every utility has often a number of power generating facilities, miles and miles of wires, tens or hundreds of thousands of customers. And if you look at it as a whole, you have a lot more opportunities to find reductions, rather than if you just look at a single power plant. So the plan allows states and utilities to meet their goals, whether through cleaner fuels, increased efficiency, or more renewable energy. Instead of being required to retrofit one plant, or perhaps even shut it down, a utility can shift generation from dirty plants to cleaner plants. They could expand energy efficiency or expand renewable energy, all of which reduces the average emissions from the system. So the end result of this would be a 26% reduction by 2020, a 30% reduction by 2030 compared by 2005 levels. And EPA estimates that the benefits for this will be between $50 and $90 billion for a cost of $7 to $9 billion. That's a 10-to-1 return on our investment. So what's really smart about this is it gets everybody involved, and that's what it's going to be taking to get us there, and particularly to take advantage of energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is the low-hanging fruit of carbon-cutting strategies. It's simply cutting waste. According to the firm McKinsey, the U.S. alone is sitting on a potential of $1.2 trillion in energy efficiency measures. There's opportunities to cut food, by the way, not only in electricity, cut waste, not only in electricity, but food waste, transportation waste, all these areas, and it's money just waiting to be taken for us. One of the things that people don't realize, though, is that buildings account for about half of our energy. In cities, it's much more than that. In Orlando, I think buildings are about 75% of carbon emissions. New York City, it's about 80%. And at the same time, these buildings waste an enormous amount of energy. Many of them were built before modern energy codes were in place, and so energy is literally flying out the windows or leaking through cracks. But making buildings more efficient is as much a policy issue as it is a technical issue, perhaps even more so. And it's good that cities are taking the lead in making this energy efficiency work. With projects like Greenworks Orlando are empowering the cities to pick the low-hanging fruit and make the most of the cost of energy efficiency. You've heard a little bit, but I want to repeat it because it really is impressive what Orlando is doing. They will, in fact, be the leader in the Southeast. Using the Greenworks Orlando Sustainability Plan, as you heard, the city set goals of reducing your emissions by 25% by 2018 and 90%. I mean, no one else in the country is doing that by 2040. And with this relatively small investment, I think it was $1 million from the stimulus, you improved the energy efficiency of 28 municipal buildings and reduced energy bills by an average of 31% a year. And then you're pumping the savings back into an energy revolving fund, using it to fund even more energy efficiency programs. And so thanks to that, 110 more city facilities, including city swimming centers and even this building, I think, are getting energy efficiency upgrades. It's really quite impressive. So this energy efficiency work is being bolstered by your participation in NRDC's Clean Energy Plan, of which you were one of 10 cities selected out of a nationwide group of cities that applied to participate. And that project also focuses on improving energy efficiency in the city's largest buildings, which is important. The City Energy Project, NRDC City Energy Project, was born a bit the same way your Greenworks Orlando was built. The idea that we could use the stimulus money not once, but again and again if we reinvested those savings from the energy efficiency. And one of the key tools of the City Energy Project is energy benchmarking and disclosure. So managers and tenants can see how much energy their buildings use. As they say, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So we say, okay, let's measure it. And that is having a huge impact. City Energy Project experts will also be helping Orlando to develop energy financing instruments to offset upfront costs, which can sometimes stall energy efficiency investment. Even though long-term savings are indisputable, capital isn't always readily available for financing the projects that might be necessary. So among the 10 cities in the City Energy Project as a whole, we expect to cut as much climate pollution as taking off 1.5 million cars off the road every year. The project will save Orlando $55 million a year on energy bills, and across the 10 cities combined, it will be nearly $1 billion annually in energy costs. This is the type of thing that you can get with energy efficiency. It's a successful energy solution because it's a successful business practice. Whether it be buildings like the Empire State Building in New York or small offices in Philadelphia, all of these places are seeing 35% or more energy reductions, millions of dollars of energy savings, and paybacks that are very quick, 1, 2, 3, 5 years. We have one story I love. A simple law firm in a building in Philadelphia is saving almost $2 million on its electricity by doing energy efficiency upgrades. This is just one mid-sized law firm in one mid-sized building in one mid-sized city. Imagine if that is replicated around the country. And thanks to you guys here, we have the chance of doing that. Here's another great story that is nearby. A company called C2 Synergy, or 2G Synergy, which makes highly efficient combined heat and power systems for business and industry, is in St. Augustine. CHP systems, combined heat and power systems, generate electricity and use the thermal energy. And they're much more efficient than conventional power plants, which lose about half the energy in their waste heat. Now we all know, and we've seen battles over what to do with that waste heat. You build cooling power, you dump it in the river. CHP says instead of fighting over what to do with this waste heat, why don't we use it productively? And so all of what used to be waste is now useful, and these systems are 90% rather than 40% efficient. The trouble is most of them have to be custom made, and that becomes expensive and slow. So what 2G's figured out is how to develop a plug-and-play system that can be installed and ready to go in just a day or two. And that is a huge time saver, a huge money saver. They hired 50 people right off the bat, and as I understand, their plan calls for hiring another 100 or more in the next year. This is the type of thing that energy efficiency can do. It saves you, the consumer, money, it provides local jobs that can't be outsourced, and it's exciting. It's actually pretty cool stuff. So when the President announced his Climate Action Plan a year ago, it really was a breathtaking and groundbreaking moment. For the first time, an American president had presented a plan to tackle climate change. But in another sense, the announcement was just a logical extension of what was already happening here in Orlando, in New York City, in other states, and all around the country. In fact, 25% of the US population lives in states that are already limiting carbon pollution from power plants. That's right, a quarter of the country is already doing this. We have the know-how to solve this problem. We have the low-cost tools that can help us do it. The only thing that is standing in our way is the lethargy of the status quo and the entrenched special interests who are invested in that status quo and who are lobbying intensively, and often with misleading advertising, to roll back the current clean energy and efficiency efforts and keep us dependent on dirty energy. But we can change this, but we can do that only with your help. So every time any of you choose to take the bus or a ride share, when you choose to invest in energy efficiency in your home or your business, when you tell your elected officials that you expect action to combat climate change, congratulate them when they do it, demand of them when they don't. When you support EPA's Clean Action Plan at the state level or at the federal level, all of that are important measures that we'll take that are necessary for us to get there. And as we like to say, what happens in Orlando does not just stay in Orlando. The strategies and policies that you do here will make a difference, as I said, not only in the Southeast, not only throughout the US, but in fact globally, because you guys really do have a chance to set the stage and be a model. So it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
We have time for 2 questions. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Wait, keep giving it.
Hi, good morning. There was a comment that you made about financing the capital of businesses that were interested in going green. Could you elaborate on that quickly?
Sure. There are a lot of different ways. For example, in New York, one of the things we piloted and is now getting at scale, and the City Energy Project will try to get in place in others, is essentially a green bank. One of the interesting things we found is that energy efficiency, it's not a standard thing that banks know much about. So some bankers even told us that when somebody had an energy efficiency project, they didn't even know which division of the bank to assign it to. So encouraging and using, in this case in New York and in New York City, and this will be followed with the City Energy, sort of a little bit of boost to the banks, whether it be loan guarantees or others, and educating the private sector the private financial sector about energy efficiency, you end up creating a new stream of capital for this. And if you think about it, it's not a surprise. If you invest in a typical business, you have an income stream. With energy efficiency, you have the saving streams. And that's, for many people, a little harder to quantify, maybe not quite so reliable. So it's taken a lot of education as well as things like loan guarantees to get that financial stream up and running.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. I'm Clayton Farrar, Executive Director of Ideas for Us. The day after the EPA announced their Clean Power Plan, China announced that they would be seeking similar cutbacks to carbon. Are you hopeful of seeing other cities around the world also jump onto the bandwagon of utilizing this energy efficiency as well?
Very much so. NRDC has a pretty big office in Beijing, and we're also working in India and in Latin America. And in almost all of these places where we go, frankly, our calling card is energy efficiency. It's a great opening topic in a way because it saves them money, and that builds up our credibility. China has, frankly, a very inefficient system in terms of amount of pollution and energy per dollar of GDP, and they have great opportunities to increase the efficiency of their buildings as well as of their industry. Of course, the issue is a little different. In places like China and India, the estimate is roughly that 80% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 aren't yet built. So it's a new building issue. It's the opposite here. 80% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 in the US are already built. So here it's often more of a retrofit issue. So you've got the building opportunities and you've got industrial opportunities. And in both of those areas, we've been working with them. We've helped rewrite the building code in China on the energy sessions, and similarly in India. And to try to create the same as the first question asked, financing mechanisms, measuring mechanism, so that big industries can actually start quantifying their energy savings. But we have found in China, they have 5-year plans, and they have been reducing the carbon intensity of their economy very significantly in each of the recent 5-year plans. So if you overall, and of course given the size of the China economy, the reductions that they're making are enormous. And in China as well, it's not only happening at the national level, but you're seeing real leadership at the local level. Cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou are really stepping even ahead of their provincial or their national governments and setting the stage. So a lot of interest in it there. And the same is also true, I should say, in India, where again, local governments are often in the lead saying we can implement energy efficiency programs. We know this is going to have an immediate payback. It cleans our air, it saves money right away, and avoids the need to build new power plants, which in many of these countries is tough.
Thanks so much. Let's give Peter a hand.